Let me ask you something. When was the last time you won an argument but walked away feeling like you actually lost? Maybe the other person shut down, got defensive, or just nodded their head until you stopped talking. That's not winning. That's just burning the bridge while standing on it. Here's the truth. Most arguments don't fail because people don't know what to say. They fail because people want to win more than they want to be respected. If your goal in a disagreement is to dominate, prove somebody wrong, or score points, you've already lost. Respect is not about who talks louder. It's about who stays grounded, clear, and in control. Most arguments fail because the focus is on winning, not respecting. When people get into a disagreement, their minds often go straight to, how do I prove I'm right? Rather than, how do I make sure this conversation builds, not breaks the relationship. That mindset is the root cause of most conflicts escalating into shouting matches, stonewalling, or long-term resentment. If you think about it, every argument has two layers: the surface layer, which is about the topic itself, and the deeper layer, which is about the need for dignity and respect. When the deeper layer gets ignored, it doesn't matter how much evidence you pile up, how clever your words are, or how passionately you speak. The other person feels disrespected, and once respect is gone, so is any chance of influence. Winning in the traditional sense looks like scoring points, proving the other person wrong, or shutting them down. But think about the cost of that so-called victory. If you win the argument but leave your partner feeling dismissed, your coworker feeling belittled, or your friend feeling unheard, what did you actually accomplish? You may have proved a point, but you lost credibility and trust. The next time you need cooperation or understanding, the other person is going to remember how you treated them, not how strong your argument was. Respect has a long memory, and once you erode it, you'll find yourself fighting the same battles over and over again, just with more resistance. Now, let's flip this around. What happens when your goal isn't to win, but to respect and be respected? The dynamic changes completely. Instead of gearing up for battle, you ground yourself in clarity. Instead of listening for weaknesses in the other person's words, you listen for understanding. Instead of swinging for a knockout, you look for common ground, or at least mutual recognition. Ironically, when you stop trying to win at all costs, you often come out ahead anyway. People are far more likely to consider your perspective, compromise, or even change their stance if they feel respected in the process. Respect opens doors that aggression slams shut. This shift matters in every type of relationship. In families, arguments about chores, parenting, or finances often spin out of control because both sides want to be right. But when someone says, I hear your point, here's where I stand, the conversation shifts from competition to cooperation. In the workplace, power struggles often masquerade as debates about strategy. A manager who bulldozes their team might get short-term compliance but loses long-term loyalty. A leader who frames their input with respect, acknowledging others before adding their perspective, earns both authority and trust. Even in friendships, respect is the glue that holds disagreements together. Friends don't stay friends because they agree on everything. They stay friends because they can disagree without tearing each other apart. Here's the uncomfortable truth chasing the win. In arguments is usually about ego. It's about wanting to feel superior, validated, or in control. But ego-driven victories are shallow. They don't strengthen the bond, they weaken it. Respect, on the other hand, requires humility. It requires the discipline to pause and ask, am I trying to solve this problem, or am I just trying to look good? That kind of self-check separates people who build influence from people who constantly burn bridges. Think about the leaders, mentors, or even family members you respect most. Do you respect them because they always won arguments, or do you respect them because they carried themselves with steadiness, fairness, and composure even when you disagreed with them? Chances are it's the second one. Respect is not about controlling the other person. It's about controlling yourself. It's about holding the line on your truth while still making space for theirs. That balance is what makes people walk away saying, I may not agree, but I respect how they handled that. The mistake many people make is believing that respect equals weakness, that if you don't fight a win, you'll get steamrolled. That couldn't be further from the truth. Respect is not rolling over. Respect is not silence. Respect is stating your position clearly, calmly, and consistently without needing to humiliate or dominate the other person. There is strength in restraint. There is power in composure. And the person who can stay grounded when the other is unraveling always comes out stronger. When your focus shifts from winning to respecting, the entire tone of your communication changes. You choose words that clarify rather than attack. You listen with the intention of understanding, not ammunition. You set boundaries firmly but without hostility. And you walk away with your integrity intact, even if the disagreement remains unresolved. That's the true definition of winning. Because at the end of the day, you don't just want to be right, you want to be effective. Respect is the currency of every meaningful relationship. Arguments that aim for victory drain that account. Arguments that aim for respect invest in it. If you want to stop watching your conversations collapse into chaos, start by asking yourself one question before you speak. Am I chasing the win, or am I building respect? The answer to that question will tell you whether you're about to repeat the same old failures or step into a way of communicating that actually lasts. Most people don't realize how much damage they do when they dress up their words with sarcasm, exaggeration, or personal attacks. They think they're being persuasive, but what they're actually doing is making their message harder to hear and easier to dismiss. When emotions are high, clarity becomes more valuable than cleverness. If the person across from you has to fight through layers of drama to get to your point, they're not going to take you seriously. And if they feel attacked instead of informed, they're going to stop listening altogether. Stating your truth without spin is about stripping your words down to the essentials. It's about saying what you mean without adding fuel that turns the discussion into a battle. For example, instead of saying, "You always ignore me," which is an exaggeration and an accusation, you can say, "I feel like my input isn't being considered right now." Notice the difference. One starts a fight, the other starts a conversation. One puts the other person on the defensive, the other opens the door to a real exchange. The reason this matters so much is because spin is usually a shield. People hide behind sarcasm, exaggeration, and blame because they're uncomfortable being vulnerable. It feels easier to attack than to expose how you really feel. But here's the truth: vulnerability takes strength, and people respect strength. When you state your truth directly, you're showing courage. You're saying, "This is where I stand, and I don't need to disguise it in a joke or an insult." That kind of honesty may not always get agreement, but it earns respect. Let's be real: when you spin your words, you're also sabotaging your own credibility. Think about a coworker who always blows things out of proportion. "Nobody ever helps me. Everything is always my responsibility. This system never works." Do you take them seriously after a while? Or do you roll your eyes because you know they're exaggerating? Now think about the person who can state a problem calmly and clearly. "I've noticed I'm carrying a heavier workload than others on the team. Here's the data. Which one do you listen to? Which one has influence?" Respect follows clarity, not theatrics. Another reason spin backfires is because it shifts the focus away from the issue and onto the delivery. If you lace your point with sarcasm, the other person doesn't hear the concern, they hear the tone. If you exaggerate, they spend their energy arguing against your overstatement instead of addressing the real problem. If you attack, they stop listening to the content and start protecting their ego. In other words, your spin hijacks your own message. There's also a deeper layer to this. When you spin, you're not just distorting the message for the other person, you're distorting it for yourself. Exaggeration and blame can trick you into believing a version of the story that isn't fully true. And if you believe your own spin, you end up defending positions that aren't grounded in reality. That's how small disagreements turn into all-out wars. Stating your truth clearly keeps you anchored in facts and feelings, not fantasies and false narratives. Now, stating your truth without spin doesn't mean you become robotic or cold. It doesn't mean you swallow your emotions. It means you own your emotions directly instead of weaponizing them. Saying, "I feel hurt that you didn't include me," is powerful. Saying, "You don't care about me at all," is destructive. The first invites dialogue, the second invites retaliation. The difference is whether you're speaking from ownership or from accusation. You also have to remember that brevity is a form of respect. Long, winding explanations or emotional rants bury your truth under noise. A clear, direct statement is easier to hear and harder to twist. If you can't state your point in one or two simple sentences, you probably don't understand it well enough yourself. Clarity starts with you, and it shows up in how you communicate. The most respected communicators in any setting, leaders, negotiators, even parents, don't waste words. They don't spin, they don't ramble, they don't sugarcoat. They tell you what they believe, what they need, and what they expect. And because they don't clutter their words with emotional debris, people take them seriously. You may not always like what they say, but you know exactly where they stand. That's what builds influence. When you state your truth without spin, you're sending two powerful signals at once. You're telling the other person that you respect yourself enough to be direct, and you're telling them that you respect them enough to let them hear the unvarnished truth. That combination creates a foundation for real problem solving. The other person may still disagree, but they can't dismiss you as dramatic, manipulative, or unfair. They have to engage with what you actually said. In the long run, the people who win respect in arguments aren't the ones who talk the loudest, get the angriest, or deliver the sharpest insults. They're the ones who can stand their ground with clarity, own their emotions without blame, and speak in a way that gets to the heart of the matter. Stating your truth without spin isn't just about communication. It's about discipline, integrity, and courage. And those are the qualities that not only stop arguments from failing, but also turn them into opportunities for real connection. The third key point is about listening long enough to understand. Most people don't actually listen in arguments, they reload. They sit there nodding, but inside they're preparing their comeback, sharpening their next point, or rehearsing their counterattack. The problem is, when you do that, You're not having a conversation, you're having two monologues that just happen to be happening at the same time. Real influence doesn't come from dominating the airspace. It comes from showing the other person that you actually get what they're saying. Respect is built not when you speak, but when you prove you've listened. Listening long enough to understand means slowing down your reaction time. It means resisting the urge to jump in the moment you hear something you disagree with. It's about letting the other person finish their thought, even when you think you already know where it's going. And more than that, it's about taking their words seriously enough to reflect them back before you share your perspective. For example, if your coworker says, "I feel like you cut me off in meetings," instead of saying, "Well, that's not true," you might say, "So what I'm hearing is that you feel like I don't give you space to finish your thoughts. Is that right?" That simple act changes the whole dynamic. Instead of being dismissed, the other person feels acknowledged. Instead of escalating, the conversation stabilizes. The truth is, people don't just want to be right, they want to be heard. And sometimes being heard matters more than the outcome itself. You've probably been in situations where you weren't even that angry about the issue, but you got angrier the longer the other person ignored or talked over you. That's not about the issue. That's about respect. When someone proves they're listening, it diffuses tension. When someone proves they're not, it pours gasoline on the fire. Listening also prevents you from making assumptions. When you're locked in argument mode, you often hear what you expect to hear instead of what's actually being said. You project motives, you exaggerate their intent, you twist their words into ammunition for your case. But when you stop and really listen, you may discover that you actually agree on more than you thought, or at least that the gap isn't as wide as you assumed. Many arguments spiral because both sides are fighting against an imagined version of what the other person meant, not the real message. Taking time to listen clears away those false narratives. Another powerful effect of listening is that it buys you credibility. People are far more willing to consider your perspective after they feel you've considered theirs. It's a reciprocity effect. When you give respect, you usually get it back. If you bulldoze over their words, they'll do the same to you. But if you show them that their viewpoint matters enough for you to pause, reflect, and engage, they're much more likely to extend the same courtesy when it's your turn. Listening is not weakness, it's strategic. It creates the opening for your message to actually land. It's important to note that listening doesn't mean agreeing. Too many people think that if they let the other person feel heard, it means they're conceding. That's not the case. You can listen fully and still disagree. You can reflect back their words and still hold your position. In fact, stating their perspective clearly often makes your disagreement stronger because it proves you're not rejecting a straw man, you're rejecting the real argument. For example, saying, "I understand that you feel overlooked when decisions are made without you, and I get why that's frustrating. I still believe in this case we had to move quickly, and I'll try to keep you looped in next time," is miles more effective than, "Well, that's just not what happened." Listening long enough to understand also means listening with your whole attention. That means putting down the phone, turning off distractions, and giving real eye contact. It means responding to what was actually said, not what you assumed was said. It means listening not only for words, but for emotions underneath those words. Sometimes the issue being argued about isn't the real issue at all. Someone might be angry about a small detail on the surface, but what's really going on is that they feel unappreciated, invisible, or unsafe. If you only argue about the surface, you'll never resolve the deeper wound. But if you listen carefully, you can address what actually matters. Respect is earned when people feel seen, heard, and valued, and one of the fastest ways to provide that is through active listening. Even repeating back one line, so you're saying, can change the energy of an argument. Even pausing and saying, "Tell me more about why you feel that way," can unlock information you would have missed otherwise. Arguments don't fail because people disagree. They fail because people stop listening. If you can stay patient long enough to truly understand, you won't just avoid failure, you'll build respect that lasts long after the disagreement is over. In the end, listening is not about silence, it's about presence. It's not about waiting your turn. It's about making sure the other person knows they have your full attention. And when you give someone that gift, they walk away not only respecting you more, but also being far more open to your perspective. That's the paradox. The less you fight to be heard, the more your words carry weight when you do speak. The fourth key point is about setting the boundary without raising the temperature. When most people think about boundaries, they think about hard lines, ultimatums, or slamming the door shut on the other person. They see boundaries as walls when in reality, they're more like guardrails. Boundaries are not about controlling the other person. They're about controlling yourself. They're about clearly defining what you will and won't accept while keeping the conversation from turning into a battlefield. The mistake most people make is that they set boundaries in the heat of anger, which makes the boundary feel like an attack rather than a standard. And when boundaries feel like attacks, the other person pushes back even harder. The key is learning how to state your boundary with firmness but not hostility. Think of it like holding your ground in quicksand. You don't need to thrash, you just need to stay steady. For example, if someone starts yelling at you, your instinct might be to yell back or to shut them down aggressively, but that only raises the temperature. A boundary in this case would sound like, I want to continue this conversation, but I won't do it while we're yelling. If we can bring the volume down, I'll keep talking. Notice that you're not telling them who they are or attacking their character. You're simply defining the terms under which you will engage. That's a boundary. Boundaries matter in arguments because they provide structure. Without them, conversations spiral into chaos. People talk over each other, drag in old issues, and escalate into personal attacks. With boundaries, you create rules of engagement that keep the disagreement from destroying the relationship. And here's the truth. People respect those who enforce their boundaries consistently. If you let someone trample all over you, they may not say it out loud, but they lose respect. If you bite back with hostility every time, they see you as volatile. But if you calmly and clearly define your limits, they may not like it, but they'll respect it. Another layer here is understanding that boundaries are about self-respect first. You don't set them because you want to punish the other person. You set them because you value yourself enough to require a certain standard of interaction. If someone is talking down to you, cutting you off, or ignoring your needs, the boundary isn't about changing them. It's about protecting your dignity. For example, you might say, I'm not willing to continue this discussion if I'm being interrupted. I'll come back when we can both listen. That's not about controlling their behavior, it's about controlling your response. The mistake many people make is waiting too long to set boundaries. They let things pile up until their frustration boils over, and then the boundary comes out as an explosion. By that point, the conversation is already damaged. Boundaries work best when they're set early and enforced consistently. Just like a parent guiding a child or a coach guiding a team, it's not about waiting until chaos breaks loose to establish rules. It's about creating the framework before the chaos begins. It's also important to understand that boundaries aren't ultimatums. Ultimatums usually come from a place of desperation. Do this, or I'm leaving. Boundaries come from a place of clarity. Here's what I'm willing to engage with, and here's what I'm not. The difference is tone. Ultimatums often feel like manipulation. Boundaries feel like standards. Ultimatums feel resistance. Boundaries earn respect. One of the best ways to set a boundary without raising the temperature is to use calm, simple language. The longer and more emotional you make it, the more defensive the other person becomes. Short sentences carry strength. I'm not okay with that. I'm willing to talk when we're both calm. This is where I stand. You don't have to explain endlessly, justify yourself, or convince the other person. A clear boundary speaks for itself. Another powerful piece of setting boundaries is follow-through. A boundary without follow-through is just a wish. If you say, I won't continue this conversation if you keep insulting me, but then you stay and engage after the next insult, you've taught the other person that your words don't mean much. On the other hand, if you calmly disengage when the boundary is crossed, you reinforce your standard. Consistency is what gives boundaries their power. Setting boundaries also means being okay with the fact that not everyone will like them. Some people will accuse you of being cold, uncooperative, or difficult when you start drawing lines. That's because they benefited when you didn't have any. But respect doesn't come from pleasing everyone. It comes from standing firm in your values. Over time, even the people who resist your boundaries may come to respect them because they know exactly what to expect from you. Boundaries don't have to end relationships. In fact, they often save them. A marriage without boundaries becomes toxic. A workplace without boundaries becomes dysfunctional. A friendship without boundaries becomes lopsided and resentful. Boundaries protect the relationship by ensuring that both people can show up without being trampled, silenced, or disrespected. They keep the temperature down because they provide clarity. Everyone knows the rules of engagement. At the end of the day, setting the boundary without raising the temperature is about combining firmness with composure. It's about refusing to participate in chaos while still holding your ground. It's about saying, I value this relationship enough to stay, but I value myself enough to require respect while I do. That balance is what turns arguments from destructive battles into opportunities for growth. Boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges with guardrails. They don't block connection, they protect it. And when you master the art of setting them calmly, you stop losing respect in arguments and start earning it in ways that last.